There are sounds you never forget on a farm. The crack of a dry stalk in a good harvest wind, the low growl of a diesel engine finding its rhythm before dawn, the soft hiss of grain sliding into a full wagon. Those are good sounds. Sounds that mean something is working, something is right. And then there's the other sound, the one that makes your stomach drop straight through the floor of your boots. The sound of a machine that costs more than most people's houses, going silent when it should be screaming. Not shutting down, not idling, just stopping. Like it decided the job was too hard and quit on its own. That sound happened on a Tuesday morning in October of 2021, outside of Ames, Iowa, in a cornfield that had been farmed by the Calloway family since 1947. The machine that made that sound, or rather stopped making sound, was a brand new combine, a Case IH Axial Flow 9250. $2,040,000 of the most advanced harvesting technology on the planet, GPS-guided header, 36-foot cutting width, automatic yield mapping, a grain tank that held 350 bushels, a cab that looked like the cockpit of a commercial airliner, climate-controlled, leather-seated, with a touch-screen console that monitored 47 different system parameters at once. It was sitting in 8 inches of mud buried to its belly, and it wasn't going anywhere. And somewhere on the edge of that field, watching from behind the wheel of a 1968 Ford pickup with 212,000 miles on the odometer, was a man named Roy Dunnigan, 78 years old, farmer, veteran, widower, and the owner of a 1944 Farmall M that had been working Iowa ground since before the war ended. What happened in the next 3 minutes changed every person who saw it, and this is that story. Iowa, if you're new here, this channel is about the stories that happen between the headlines, the ones that don't make the evening news because they happened in a cornfield at 7 in the morning with nobody watching but a handful of farmers who'll remember it the rest of their lives. If that's the kind of story you want to hear, hit subscribe. We put one out every week. Now let's get back to Roy Dunnigan and that stuck combine. You have to understand what October means in Iowa to understand why that Tuesday morning mattered so much. October is the harvest window. It's not a suggestion, it's not a guideline. It's the 30-day margin between a profitable year and a disaster. The corn is dry enough to combine, usually. The beans are down. The ground is still firm enough, usually, and the weather is holding, usually. But October in Iowa is also when the rains come back, when a low-pressure system can roll in from the northwest and turn 48 hours into a season-ending event, when every farmer in the county is watching the same forecast and running the same math. The Calloway operation, 1,200 acres of corn and soybeans spread across 3 sections of Story County, had been in harvest since the 1st of October. Wade Calloway, 44 years old, 3rd generation, had invested everything in this year. A new combine to replace the aging John Deere that had finally thrown a bearing in the spring, a new grain cart, upgraded augers at the bin site, the kind of capital investment that only makes sense if the harvest comes in clean and on time. The Case IH 9250 arrived in August. Wade had gone to 3 different demos, sat in 4 dealer cabs, run the numbers 17 different ways. He knew what $2 million meant on paper. He knew what it meant on the line of credit his banker had agreed to extend. And he knew that machine had to earn its keep starting October 1st. The first 10 days had been everything the salesman promised. 40-acre-an-hour cutting rates. Grain loss under 0.5%. The automatic header height adjustment finding the perfect cut every pass. Wade's son Tyler, 21 years old and just back from his first year at Iowa State, rode the grain cart and never had to wait. The bins were filling, the numbers were good, and then on the morning of October 12th, the forecast changed. Not dramatically, not the kind of change that shows up on the news, just a slight shift in the jet stream that pushed a front 2 days earlier than expected. Rain Thursday, maybe heavy, maybe 1.5 inches over 48 hours. Which on already softening October ground means one thing. If you're not done by Wednesday night, you might not finish until November. Wade had 460 acres left. 2 days. He needed the machine to run perfectly. The field they started Tuesday morning was the northeast quarter. 80 acres of Tama silt loam, the best ground in the county in a normal year. Dark, rich, high organic matter. Corn that had gone 192 bushels to the acre in the summer assessment. The kind of field you save for last because you know it'll finish strong. Except this year, the northeast quarter had gotten wet in September. A drain tile had been plugged since spring. Wade knew it, had meant to fix it, hadn't gotten to it before the corn went in. The water had pooled in the northwest corner of the field for most of August and September, and even though it had drained some by October, the soil profile was saturated. Not standing water, just soft. The kind of soft that doesn't show up until 12 tons of steel sits on it. Let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching this video from. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next video. Wade made 2 passes with the combine before he felt it. A slight hesitation in the tracks, a difference in the way the machine moved, heavier, slower, like it was dragging through something thicker than dirt. He checked the monitor, ground pressure warning. He pulled back the cutting speed, dropped the header slightly, tried to angle away from the problem area. He made half of a third pass. The northwest corner of that northeast quarter field is a place Wade Calloway will never forget, because that's where the ground just let go. 1 second the combine was moving, slow but moving. The next second, the tracks were sinking. Not fast, not dramatically, just sinking. An inch, 6 inches, a foot. The onboard system detected the loss of traction and automatically reduced power to prevent drivetrain damage. It was a safety feature, a designed response to an unexpected condition. The computer was protecting the machine. The machine was in 8 inches of mud and going nowhere. Wade sat in that climate-controlled cab, in the leather seat, with the touchscreen showing him 47 system parameters, none of which included a solution for this. He picked up his phone and called his father. "Dad, the 9250's stuck." A pause on the other end. Then, "How bad?" "Bad enough. Northwest corner of the northeast quarter, that plugged tile." Another pause. Then, "I'll make some calls." What happened next is the part of the story that nobody in Story County had trouble believing, because it's the same story that plays out somewhere in the Midwest every harvest season, in some field, with some expensive machine and some crew of very capable people who discover that capability and the right tool for the job are not always the same thing. The first call Wade's father Jim made was to his neighbor Dale Perkins. Dale ran a custom harvesting operation, had been doing it for 22 years, and owned a John Deere 9R410, a 410 horsepower four-wheel drive tractor that was the biggest pulling machine in the county. If anything could yank that combine out, it was Dale's Big Green. Dale arrived at 9:15 with 1,200 feet of 2-inch nylon pulling strap and a confidence that came from having done this before. He backed the 9R up to the combine, hooked his strap to the rear drawbar, and gave it a pull. 410 horsepower broke that strap like a piece of kite string. Not because the strap was weak, it was rated for 200,000 pounds, but because the mud had a grip on that combine that wasn't about force, it was about suction. The saturated silt loam had wrapped itself around the tracks and the belly pan of that machine like a cold hand. And when Dale hit the throttle and applied peak force in a single hard pull, he didn't break the suction, he just snapped the strap. They tried a second strap, heavier this time. 3-inch, rated for 300,000 pounds. Dale took up the slack slowly, let the tension build, gave it a steady pull instead of a jerk. The combine moved about 3 inches. Then the tractor's rear tires broke loose and started spinning. 410 horsepower, and the ground just didn't care. Jim called the dealer. The Case IH rep in Ames was sympathetic, professional, and not immediately helpful. They could send a service technician, but a technician couldn't pull the machine out of the mud. That was a recovery operation. They could recommend a heavy equipment company out of Des Moines that specialized in machinery recovery. 4-hour minimum response time. Quote on arrival. Jim called the heavy equipment company. The dispatcher was polite. Yes, they had experience with this. Yes, they could send a crew. The earliest they could be on site was Thursday morning. Thursday morning. The rain was coming Thursday. Jim called his cousin in Boone County, who had a 300-ton hydraulic winch setup he'd used for bridge construction. The cousin was willing. He was also 5 hours away with a full crew working. By 11 o'clock Tuesday morning, the combine had been stuck for 3 hours. 410 horsepower hadn't moved it. The dealer was on the phone. The recovery company was 2 days out, and the rain was 46 hours away. Wade was standing at the edge of the field, boots already deep in the muck, looking at $2 million of idle investment, when he heard a truck slow down on the county road. A 1968 Ford F-100, faded red. The kind of truck that's been through enough Iowa winters that the rust has its own character. It pulled onto the field road, came to a stop, and a man got out. Tall, thin, white hair under a green cap that had the Pioneer Seed logo on it, worn almost colorless. Work boots so old the leather had conformed to the exact shape of his feet over decades. He walked to the edge of the field, looked at the stuck combine, looked at the churned-up mud around it, looked at the broken strap still lying in the dirt. Roy Dunnigan. Roy had farmed the quarter section directly south of the Calloway ground since 1968. He was 78 years old. He'd retired from full-time farming in 2015, when his knees finally convinced him that he wasn't going to win that particular argument. But he still kept the farm, rented the cropland to Wade's father, and he still kept the equipment that he'd collected over 53 years of farming this particular piece of Iowa ground, including a 1944 Farmall M that had never, not once, in 77 years failed to start on the first try. Roy stood at the edge of the field for a long time without saying anything. Then he looked at Wade. "What have you tried?" Wade told him. Dale's tractor, the straps, the dealer, the recovery company. Roy nodded like a man confirming something he already suspected. "When's the rain coming?" "Thursday morning." Roy looked at the combine, looked at the mud, looked at the sky, which was still blue and cooperative and completely indifferent to anyone's timeline. "I've got the M," he said. "Let me go get her." Wade looked at the old man. He was polite about it. He was respectful. But he said what he had to say. "Roy, we just tried 410 horsepower. That M makes what, 38? 45 at the drawbar," Roy said. "In 1944. She's a little better now." "Roy, I know what you're thinking," Roy said, "and you're not wrong about the horsepower. But horsepower isn't what pulled Dale's tractor backward. You had too much power applied too fast. Suction mud doesn't release under shock load. It has to be coaxed. Long, steady pull, inch by inch. Give the air time to get in under the machine. You need a tractor that won't give up when nothing moves, not a tractor that can move anything in a hurry." He looked at the big green 9R still sitting at the edge of the field. "That's a fast machine. I've got a patient one." Wade didn't have a better option. "Go get the M," he said. "Now let me tell you about the 1944 Farmall M. Because you need to understand what Roy Dunnigan drove onto that field if you want to understand what happened next." The Farmall M was introduced by International Harvester in 1939 and produced through 1952. During that run, they built over 260,000 of them, which made it one of the most successful farm tractors in American history. It was designed to replace horse teams on mid-sized farms, to do everything a working farm needed done, from plowing to cultivating to belt work, on a single machine that a single farmer could operate and maintain. Roy's M had been built in 1944, the same year the Allied forces landed at Normandy. It had come to Iowa from the factory in Rock Island, Illinois, originally purchased by a man named Elmer Stauffer, who'd farmed 160 acres on the east side of Story County until he died in 1971. Roy had bought it from Elmer's widow for $800, cleaned out the fuel system, replaced the spark plugs, changed the oil, and started farming with it that same fall. That was 53 years before the day he drove it toward Wade Calloway's stuck combine. In those 53 years, Roy had never rebuilt the engine, never replaced the magneto, never touched the original crankshaft or the original connecting rods. The C264 inline four-cylinder engine, 264 cubic inches of cast iron, was original equipment, still running on the same block that had been cast and bored and fitted at the Rock Island plant in the spring of 1944. He had replaced the front tires twice, the rear tires 4 times. He'd replaced the carburetor once in 1989 when the original float finally gave up. He'd replaced the water pump in 2003. He rebuilt the clutch in 2011. Those were the major repairs in 53 years of use. Every other part of that tractor, every gasket, every bearing, every gear in the transmission was original. Not because Roy was sentimental, because he maintained it. Oil every 50 hours, which he measured on the hour meter he'd mounted to the dash in 1974. Grease every working day, 32 fittings total, each one hit before he'd start a job. Coolant checked weekly, air filter cleaned monthly, valve clearance checked and adjusted every spring. The machine was 77 years old. It ran like it was 2. Roy drove it to the Calloway field on the county road. The M could make the trip at 18 miles per hour, which was adequate. He pulled in through the field entrance at 11:45, and the sound of that old engine preceded him like a rumor. A deep, unhurried thrum that you don't hear from modern equipment, the kind of mechanical voice that means every revolution is doing work, not just making noise. By this time, there were 9 people standing at the edge of Wade Calloway's problem. Wade, his father Jim, Dale Perkins, who'd stayed after his tractor failed, a neighbor from the next road over who'd seen the commotion and stopped, the Case IH dealer rep who'd driven up from Ames to see the situation in person, Tyler Calloway, Wade's son, and 3 others who'd heard through the farm radio network that something interesting was happening on the Calloway ground. When Roy drove the M onto the field, the dealer rep actually laughed. Not mean, just incredulous. The way you laugh when something is so far outside your frame of reference that your brain doesn't have another response ready. "That's your backup plan?" he said to nobody in particular. Roy drove past him without comment. He drove the M up to the stuck combine, closer than anyone expected, right up to the edge of the mud, so close his front wheels were throwing it. He got down from the tractor, walked around the combine, studied the angle of the machine, studied the ground, kicked at the mud in 2 or 3 places like he was reading something written in it. Then he went back to the M and started uncoiling a chain from the toolbox. It was a logging chain. 3/4-inch links, heavy as a politician's promise. The kind of chain that doesn't stretch and doesn't snap and doesn't give you any comfort about what it might be capable of because it's so clearly capable of anything. Roy's father had bought that chain in 1951 for pulling stumps on the farm he'd broken from timber. It was 70 years old. It looked like it planned to last another 70. He ran the chain through a snatch block he mounted to the M's drawbar, a simple pulley arrangement that doubled his pulling force. Then he found the combine's main frame, not the drawbar, the main structural frame, and hooked the chain there. He checked the connections 3 times. "When I pull," he told Wade, "don't be behind the chain." How long is this going to take? Let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching this video from. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next video. Long as it takes, don't rush me. Roy climbed back onto the M, settled into the same seat reupholstered twice but the same steel pan that Elmer Stauffer had sat in on his first morning with the machine in 1944. Checked his throttle position, put the transmission in 2nd gear low range, and started to pull. The chain went taut. The M's engine dropped a few RPM as the load hit it, then found its footing and held steady. The rear tires pressed into the ground, not spinning, not slipping, just pressing, the way a man plants his feet when he's about to lift something heavy. Nothing happened. For 45 seconds, nothing happened. The chain vibrated. The engine held its note. The tires found purchase. Nothing moved. The dealer rep checked his watch. Roy didn't move, didn't change the throttle, didn't change gears, just held the pull, steady as a stone wall in a north wind. And then, at the 1-minute mark, something changed. Not in the combine, in the mud. A small sound, not loud, almost like a breath, as the suction seal around the right front track shifted slightly. A bubble of air, finding its way in. The combine moved. Half an inch, maybe less. Roy didn't react, just kept the pull steady. Another inch. The mud around the left track made a wet, releasing sound, like a boot pulling out of deep snow. Another inch. The engine note didn't change, the tires didn't spin. The chain was a ruler straight line between a 77-year-old tractor and $2 million worth of the most advanced harvesting technology on the planet. By the 2-minute mark, the combine was moving steadily. Not fast, maybe an inch every 5 seconds, but moving. By the 3-minute mark, the front tracks had broken free. The mud released them with a sound that everyone standing at the edge of that field would describe differently later. Some said it was like a cork coming out of a bottle. Some said it was like something exhaling. Some said it just sounded like victory, and the combine lurched forward onto firmer ground. Roy shut down the pull, got off the tractor, walked over and inspected the chain connection, unhooked it, walked around the combine once, checking for damage. He walked back to the M. 3 minutes and 18 seconds from when he'd put the tractor in gear. Wade Calloway was standing 10 feet away, not quite sure what had just happened. The dealer rep had stopped checking his watch. How? Wade started, then stopped. Started again. Roy, how did you know that would work? Roy was coiling his chain back into the toolbox. He didn't look up right away. When he did, his expression was the expression of a man who has spent 50 years learning things by doing them until he understood them, and who knows that the understanding can't be transferred in a conversation at the edge of a muddy cornfield. "I've pulled things out of holes since before you were born," he said. "Suction mud needs patience, not power. You've got to give it time to decide to let go. Can't force it, can't hurry it. Just have to hold steady until it's ready." And the M is patient, Roy said. That's what she is. She doesn't know how to give up because she wasn't built with a computer to tell her when a load is too hard. She just pulls until something moves or something breaks, and in 77 years nothing's ever broken. He climbed back onto the tractor, checked the time. "You've got daylight. Get your harvest in before that rain." Before we get to what happened after, and there is a lot that happened after, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been the person with the old method, the old tool, the old way of doing things, in a room full of people who were sure the new way was better? Did they listen, or did they wait until the new way failed? Because Roy Dunnigan didn't argue. He didn't explain himself to the dealer rep. He just showed up with what he had and did the work. If you've ever been that person, or known someone like that, I think you'll recognize something in this next part of the story. And if you're watching on YouTube right now, consider sharing this with someone who needs to hear it. Wade got the combine back to firm ground, ran a quick systems check, found no damage, and was cutting corn again by 12:30. He finished the northwest corner of that northeast quarter with a different approach, kept the speed down, watched the ground pressure monitor, respected what the field was telling him. He finished the field by Thursday noon, 4 hours before the first drops of rain hit the county. He didn't lose a bushel, but the story of what happened that Tuesday morning in October spread through Story County the way all true farm stories spread. At grain elevators and implement dealers and coffee shops and kitchen tables, passed from person to person with the particular reverence that farming communities reserve for events that confirm what they already secretly believed. Those old ways have value. That patience is a tool as real as any machine. That wisdom isn't the same thing as horsepower, and that the two are not interchangeable. The Case IH dealer rep, a young man named Andrew Berger, 29 years old, 3 years out of the dealer training program, genuinely good at his job, sat in his truck on the county road for 20 minutes after Roy drove away. He'd been in the equipment business long enough to understand what had just happened mechanically. He understood the suction mud principle. He understood why sustained low torque had succeeded where peak horsepower had failed. What he was still working through was the other thing, the thing that was harder to put into a sales presentation or a service manual. The fact that a 77-year-old tractor, operated by a 78-year-old man, had done in 3 minutes what 410 horsepower couldn't do in an hour. He drove back to the dealership and wrote a 4-page memo to his regional manager about recovery protocols for equipment stuck in saturated ground. In the memo, he noted that the recovery had been accomplished by a vintage tractor with less than 50 horsepower, using sustained low-torque pulling rather than high-power shock loads. He recommended that the dealership develop customer guidance materials on the subject. The regional manager thanked him for the memo and filed it. Roy Dunnigan drove his M back down the county road, put it in the shed, and went in for lunch. His daughter, who'd heard about the rescue on the farm radio, called him at 2 o'clock. "Dad, everyone's talking about what you did over at the Calloway place." "I didn't do much. You pulled a $2 million combine out of the mud with a tractor from World War II. The M did the pulling. I just didn't get in her way." Now I want to take a minute here to talk about what that means, because it's easy to hear this story and think it's about old versus new, about how modern technology fails and old technology succeeds. But that's not actually the lesson Roy was teaching, even if he wasn't trying to teach anything. The Case IH 9250 is a remarkable machine. It can harvest corn at a rate that would have seemed like science fiction to the farmers who broke this Iowa ground in the 1940s. The GPS yield mapping, the automatic header adjustment, the 350-bushel grain tank, these are real capabilities that produce real results. Wade Calloway's harvest numbers prove it. The combine didn't fail because it was bad. It failed because it was in a situation it wasn't designed for. The mud was deeper than the machine's operating parameters. The automatic power reduction that protected the drivetrain was working exactly as intended. The computer wasn't wrong. It was just working from a different set of priorities than the harvest window demanded. The Farmall M succeeded not because it was smarter or stronger or better. It succeeded because of one thing: it couldn't decide not to try. There was no computer on that tractor telling it the load was too heavy, no sensor measuring ground pressure and recommending a power reduction, no system parameter warning that the drivetrain was under stress. There was an engine, and gears, and a chain, and a man who knew how to use all three. When the load hit, the engine held. When the tires threatened to spin, Roy feathered the throttle by ear, something he'd been doing for 53 years, and kept the traction. When nothing moved for 45 seconds, he didn't back off. He just held. That patience, that refusal to interpret no motion as no progress, is what the suction mud required. And it's something that doesn't come installed. It comes from knowing your machine so well that you trust it when it asks you to wait. Roy Dunnigan had been trusting that M for 53 years. He knew what it sounded like when it was at the edge of its capacity. He knew the difference between the engine laboring and the engine straining. He knew when to back off and when to hold. That knowledge doesn't exist in a manual or a dealer training program. It accumulates hour by hour, season by season, in the seat of the same machine, on the same ground, over a working lifetime. You can buy a $2 million combine. You cannot buy 53 years of knowing a machine. Tyler Calloway, Wade's son, 21 years old, had watched the whole thing from 20 feet away. He'd watched the 410 horsepower tractor fail. He'd watched Roy back the M up to the combine. He'd watch the chain go taut and stay taut for 45 seconds while nothing moved. And he'd watch the combine come free. That evening, after the harvest was back on track and the day's adrenaline had faded into the comfortable exhaustion of a full corn cart, Tyler drove over to Roy's place. He found Roy in the machine shed, doing what Roy always did after a day's work, the maintenance that made the next day possible, greasing fittings, checking the oil, wiping down the M with a rag in the way that some men have of treating their equipment like it's worth something. "Mr. Dunnigan," Roy looked up. "Tyler, I wanted to say thank you, and also—" Tyler paused. He was 21 years old, a year of agricultural engineering behind him, the whole world of modern precision farming ahead of him. "I wanted to ask, how did you know it would work, when everyone else had given up?" Roy set down his rag, looked at the M for a moment, at the worn red paint and the oil-stained block and the chain still coiled in the toolbox where he'd put it back that afternoon. "I didn't know it would work," he said. "I knew it was worth trying. That's different." "What's the difference?" "Knowing is what you have when you've run all the numbers. Worth trying is what you have when you've run out of numbers and you still think there's something left to try." He looked at Tyler. "Your combine stopped because its computer told it to." "That's not a criticism. That computer was protecting the machine, but protection and progress aren't always the same direction. Sometimes you need a machine that doesn't know what protection means. That just pulls until something gives." "Is that what the M is?" "The M is what I've got," Roy said simply. "And what I've got I maintain. And what I maintain I trust. And what I trust I use when it's needed. That's the whole thing, son. That's all there is to it." Tyler drove home and thought about that conversation for a long time. He thought about it when he went back to Iowa State in January. He thought about it in his precision agriculture courses, learning about variable rate technology and sensor-guided planting and GPS field mapping. He thought about it when his professors talked about the future of farming, autonomous equipment, artificial intelligence, satellite-directed operations. He didn't think those things were wrong. They weren't. The future of farming is going to include all of those things, and those things are going to produce more food on less land with less environmental impact than any farming generation before has managed. That's real and it matters. But he also thought about a logging chain and a snatch block and 45 seconds of nothing moving while a 78-year-old man in a Pioneer cap held the throttle steady and waited for the mud to decide. And he understood something that his precision agriculture courses hadn't quite covered. That technology tells you what's possible under optimal conditions, and wisdom tells you what's worth trying when conditions aren't optimal. And you need both. But when the rain is coming and the combine is stuck and the optimal conditions have departed without leaving a forwarding address, wisdom is what you reach for first. Roy Dunnigan still farms his quarter section, or rather he still drives through it every morning in that 1968 Ford to make sure the tenant crop is looking right, and he still spends time in the shed with the M, keeping it on schedule. He's 81 now. His hands are stiff in the cold. His knees have filed their formal objections to the shed floor. Let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching this video from. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next video. He doesn't talk much about the Calloway rescue. If you ask him, he'll tell you it wasn't a big deal. Machine was stuck. He had something that could pull. That's what neighbors do. But in the corner of his machine shed, next to the M, there's a framed photograph. Wade Calloway brought it over in December, a print from a picture one of the bystanders had taken with their phone. The M chain taut, pulling. The combine half out of the mud. October light coming across that Story County field at just the angle that turns everything gold. Underneath the photo, Wade had written something on a small card. What the computer couldn't decide, the machine with no computer didn't have to. Roy read it once, nodded, put it on the wall next to the M, and went back to work. Here's what I want you to think about tonight. We live in a world that tells us that newer is always better, that more technology is always the answer, that if something costs $2 million and was built last year, it must be superior in every situation to something that costs $800 and was built 77 years ago. And most of the time, in most situations, that's probably true. But not every situation is optimal. Not every field is firm. Not every harvest window is cooperative. And not every problem yields to the machine with the most features and the highest price tag. Some problems require patience. Some problems require a machine that doesn't know when to quit. Some problems require the kind of knowledge that only comes from 53 seasons in the same seat, on the same ground, learning what the engine sounds like when it's working right and what it sounds like when it needs you to hold steady and wait. Roy Dunnigan's 1944 Farmall M didn't beat a $2 million combine. It saved one. There's a difference. The combine was the right machine for the job it was doing. The M was the right machine for the moment the combine couldn't handle. And the man who drove it onto that field knew the difference, because he'd spent 78 years learning what tools are for, and 53 years learning what one particular tool could do when you asked it to do everything it had. The mud let go. The harvest came in. The rain arrived Thursday morning and found nothing standing in that field that shouldn't be standing. And somewhere in a machine shed on a Story County quarter section, a 1944 Farmall M sits on the same floor it's been sitting on since 1968, maintained on schedule, ready for the next time the optimal conditions don't show up and someone needs something patient. That's what old machines are for. Not the museum, not the parade. The moment when the new machine can't decide what to do and the old one doesn't have to decide, it just goes. Thank you for spending 40 minutes with this story. If it meant something to you, share it with someone it might mean something to. Subscribe if you want more like it, and we'll see you in the next one. Oh, if this story stayed with you, there are 2 more waiting for you right now. One is about a farmer who kept a tractor his whole county laughed at, and the day it proved every one of them wrong. The other is about a woman who ran 400 acres alone with equipment nobody believed could do the job. Both of them are linked in the description. I'll see you there.